Would you like to have a drink before you go on?
Yeah, I'm getting a bit croaky.
The next question is about senior federal politicians. Would you say that the senior federal politicians are marching to someone else's beat? Like they're having the string puppets and being...
Well, they are actually not a puppet. The Prime Minister is the Managing Director of a perpetuating board, which is the elected members of the Federal Parliament, and that board is the board of the Corporation of the Commonwealth of Australia.
So that's a board of directors?
That's correct.
Right.
And the Reserve Bank that they keep putting up as lifting our interest rates is not our bank.
No, it's a commercial organisation.
It's a commercial organisation owned by the World Banking Corporation. They're manipulating our economy by manipulating our interest rates.
But in the Constitution, doesn't it say that the federal government is, or the Commonwealth Government of Australia is responsible for banking and printing money?
Yes, and the multiplication of money against the assets of the country.
Mm.
All our money is backed by the...
Yet we have a commercial organisation printing money and not on behalf of the government.
That's right, they create money.
And they create money as
and
well.
then they charge interest on something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But what people have to understand with the Commonwealth of Australia, it is the commonwealth of the people. The Commonwealth refers to all the people of Australia. The state refers to the people of each individual state, not the parliament of each state.
Well, just on that subject, for the people of northern the Yarra Valley that have this problem with the detention centre, it says on the title deed of the Northern Army camp that it belongs to the Commonwealth of Australia. It doesn't say Commonwealth Government of Australia.
Well, the Commonwealth of Australia is the people. It
It's
belongs
the people.
to us.
That's right.
If we don't want them there, and we express it through our will, then they can't have it. So all you need to do is don't go out signing these big list of names, unless at the top of it says, this is the will of the following people that you do a particular thing. And
This is then related to a petition.
In a petition, it's not a petition, it is a directive from the people. So it must contain, this is the will of the people. The government is bound by their oath of office to follow the will of the people, not to follow a petition.
So it must have those words.
It must have those words, otherwise they may as well just throw it in the bin because it has the same value as toilet paper.
Which is what's happened in the past.
Exactly.
Yes. Recently I read page 952 of the Annotated Australian Constitution, which said, correct me if I'm wrong, something like, unless the directions are expressly given to the Commonwealth Government, it's denied.
That's correct. What it really means is, if the Constitution doesn't authorise the government to have powers in any area, those powers still reside with the people. The only way they can be taken from the people is by referendum,
Right.
by consent at referendum.
So what that means, I gather, is that the federal government, or the Commonwealth Government of Australia, is given a very defined area where they can govern.
That's correct.
It's nothing else.
That's right. It says in section 52 of the Constitution, subject to this Constitution, the federal government has the power to pass laws for the good government and well-being of the Commonwealth of Australia. Mm. Now when you look at 106 of the Constitution, it says that the states can retain their constitutions subject to this Constitution and altered in accordance with their constitutions. But if you go into Hansard in 1898, Justice Griffiths and Isaacs made it very, very clear that this section has to be read to comply with section 123 of the Constitution. So in fact, even though the High Court has ruled in the past that it can be altered according to its Constitution, it is required to meet the requirements of 123 of the Constitution. If it increases or decreases the power of the state, then it can't be altered without a referendum. And above that, if it is altered, it still must comply with the authority granted by the Federal Constitution.
Right.
Now the states have decided, well, they can alter it, well, because the High Court has made rulings. Now rulings of the High Court, I know and I understand, are binding on the courts, the judges and the people. But a recent decision, HCA 29 of 2009, said the Australian courts are not legislative. And that applies to the High Court under paragraph 52 of the Cable decision, which states all courts are part of the federal judicial system with the High Court at its summit. It must then be read that if the High Court's made a decision that doesn't comply with the Constitution, it is null and void, for the simple reason is they don't have legislative power. So they can't alter a provision of the Constitution with one of their decisions.
Right.
Otherwise you would grant them legislative power.
It can only be by referendum.
That's correct. Now if you look at section 71 of the Constitution, it says for the legislature to give legislative authority to the judiciary is unconstitutional. That's where that decision in Lane versus Morrison comes from.
Right, okay. Now, while we're on that subject, are the states' constitutions illegal in reference to the federal or the Australian Commonwealth Constitution?
If they don't comply with it, yes they are.
So if they're not in agreement with it,
they're unlawful. Every part of it that doesn't agree with it is invalid, yes.
And that's stated in the Australian Constitution?
That's correct.
Unequivocally?
106.
Yeah, 106.
106 subjects the state constitution to the overriding authority of the federal constitution.
Right.
That was ruled by Griffiths J in 1923 in the Commonwealth versus the state of New South Wales.
Let's do an example of that.
Yep.
Say if the state of New South Wales had a speed limit of 80 kilometres an hour all over their state.
Yes.
And nothing was said about speed limits in the Australian Constitution. Does that make that law or legality or what do you call it,
An unlawful
statute? Statute, is that unlawful?
No.
And could you
because
explain?
speed limits and such laws come under the authority of laws for good government.
Right.
And they have the power to do that. It's like stealing, murder, assaults, all that. They all come under the laws of good government. I have no problem with any of those, and most people shouldn't have.
But being pulled up when you're not guilty of anything
Is unlawful.
like on suspicion that you're drunk,
Yes.
is unlawful
Yes.
because you haven't done anything wrong.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
In relation to speed limits, they are limited. The recording devices that they're using, majority of them are faulty. Your speedos are faulty. Tyre size, temperatures, tyre pressures, angle you look at your speedo, and all of those things have to be factored into it. And under the Australian Automotive Standards Act, which incorporates the ADRs, there is allowances given for particular speeds, like 110 has 13 k's where you shouldn't be booked.
Right.
The state government decided that it's only got a 1% tolerance, which is rubbish.
This is the Western Australian state government?
Yes.
Yes.
It should be 13 k's at that and 8 k's at 60 k's an hour.
Right.
Before you get booked.
What I would like to say about that is that I don't see how they can guarantee that those roadside multi-noders are sitting at the right angle of the road.
Well,
because they're meant to be at a certain angle to catch the speed of the vehicle.
without getting too technical, I've seen cameras on the wrong side of the road, on the opposite side of the road, recording cars coming towards it.
Right.
And going away. Like if, for instance, if you've got a 2-lane highway and the camera is mounted on the left-hand side of the road, it could record a car in the left-hand lane with a degree of accuracy. But the further it went to the right to record, you have a distance longer between the camera and the car. So they would cover that distance quicker, so that speed would be inaccurate.
Oh,
Now, if you look at Pythagoras' theorem and apply that to a roadway or just a basic triangle, you know that that is a correct statement I've just made.
Yeah.
So, if it was recording the car in the outside lane where the camera was, and it recorded one in the inside lane, the car in the inside lane, if it was doing exactly the same speed as the one in the left-hand lane, would then be going faster.